At exactly 1:47 a.m. in the Strait of Hormuz, an alarm pulsed through the Combat Information Center of a U.S. Navy carrier strike group. On a black radar screen lit by green arcs and moving symbols, a single contact broke formation, accelerated, and turned directly toward the fleet. Then came the flash. A sharp bloom of fire on the horizon, a warning shot. And for a fraction of a second, nobody knew whether the next one would be aimed to miss or aimed to kill. The sea that night looked calm from a distance, almost still, as if the Persian Gulf had gone silent on purpose. But beneath that still surface, dozens of decisions were already colliding. The U.S. fleet had entered one of the most dangerous waterways on Earth. A narrow maritime choke point where a single mistake can rewrite global politics in minutes. At the center of the formation was an American aircraft carrier, a floating airbase wrapped in steel, escorts, and layered missile defense. Around it moved guided missile destroyers, a cruiser, logistics support vessels, airborne early warning aircraft, and somewhere farther out in the darkness, a submarine that had not announced its presence to anyone. The mission was officially routine: transit, surveillance, deterrence. Unofficially, nothing about that night was routine. For hours, radar operators had been watching Iranian patrol craft shadow the formation from a distance. Fast boats, small signatures, difficult to track cleanly against sea clutter. Overhead, an E-2D Hawkeye circled high above the fleet, its rotating radar dome sweeping the Gulf for aircraft, missiles, or sudden changes in the maritime picture. In the carrier's ready rooms, fighter pilots sat strapped into a different kind of waiting, helmets at their feet, knowing that in this region, peace can vanish between one radio transmission and the next. Then, something changed. At 2:43, one of the Iranian boats broke from the others and moved closer than expected. Not charging outright, not yet. Testing, probing. The kind of maneuver designed to force a response. On the American destroyer screening the carrier's starboard flank, the bridge crew trained optics on the contact. Night vision silhouettes flickered into view. Men, wake spray, a mounted weapon. And then, without warning, the patrol craft fired a round across open water, far enough to avoid a hit, close enough to send a message. It was a warning shot. But warnings in the Gulf are never just warnings. And because what the Iranian crew may have intended as theater collided instantly with American rules of engagement, missile defense protocols, and the brutal logic of naval survival. In confined waters, a warning shot can look exactly like the opening move of a swarm attack. And swarm attacks are precisely what U.S. naval planners fear most in the Strait of Hormuz. Small, fast boats rushing in from multiple angles, shore-based anti-ship missiles waiting over the horizon, drones overhead, mines below, confusion everywhere. The first shot may be ceremonial, the second may be fatal. Within seconds, the U.S. fleet went from watchful to fully alert. On the carrier, claxons sounded through passageways and flight deck spaces. Sailors who had been monitoring routine tracks snapped into practiced motion. On the destroyers, the Aegis combat systems began sorting data at machine speed, separating harmless clutter from possible threats. The Phalanx close-in weapon systems rotated to life, their radar-guided barrels ready to shred anything that crossed the line too fast, too low, or too late. Electronic warfare teams flooded the spectrum, listening for missile guidance radars, encrypted command bursts, or drone control signals. Nothing dramatic could be seen from the outside, but inside the fleet, everything had changed. And still, the biggest danger was not what they could see. It was what they couldn't. That is what made the moment so dangerous. A lone warning shot at sea is almost never just about a lone warning shot. It can be bait, a distraction, a test of reaction time while something larger unfolds in the background. The American commanders knew that. The Iranian commanders knew they knew it. And in that layered game of signaling and counter-signaling, hesitation becomes a weapon of its own. The strike group commander had only seconds to interpret the pattern. Was this a show of defiance for domestic cameras, a deliberate harassment maneuver, or the first visible move in a coordinated trap involving coastal missile batteries and hidden submarines in shallow water? The Persian Gulf is not open ocean. It is cramped, hot, noisy, crowded, and lethal. Sonar performs poorly, maneuver room is limited. Commercial traffic complicates every tactical display. A single oil tanker on the wrong track can block lines of fire or radar coverage at exactly the wrong time. Then something unexpected happened. A second contact lit up. Not on the surface, but beneath it. The sonar room aboard one of the escorts registered a transient acoustic signature off the port quarter. Faint, brief, then another. It wasn't enough to classify with certainty, but it was enough to raise one terrifying possibility: a submarine, or at least something pretending to be one. The report shot instantly to the command level. A U.S. carrier can defend against missiles, aircraft, and fast attack craft. But in tight waters, the thing every admiral dreads is the weapon that arrives unseen. A wake-homing torpedo does not care how much steel or prestige sits above it. An MH-60R Seahawk was launched into the night, its rotors chopped through humid air as it raced low over the water, dipping sonar and readying sonobuoys. At the same time, the fleet widened its formation just enough to create defensive spacing, without broadcasting panic. Fighter jets on the carrier were pushed toward launch status. F/A-18S, armed for air defense and surface strike, waited under deck lights, catapults primed, engines almost ready to roar. Higher overhead, surveillance assets adjusted orbit patterns, pulling the invisible web tighter around the fleet. But what happened next shocked everyone. The Iranian fast boat that had fired the warning shot did not pull back. It accelerated again. Now the geometry looked worse. Another patrol craft appeared farther east, then another behind a merchant vessel's radar shadow. The screen began to populate with the kind of contacts that make naval officers sit up straighter. Individually, they were insignificant. Together, they could become a problem faster than any briefing slide ever captures, because $100 million in sensors can still be overwhelmed by a handful of cheap platforms if timing and terrain are on the attacker's side. The American destroyer nearest the threat issued warnings on bridge-to-bridge radio. Course correction demanded. Distance closing too fast. Identify intent. Break away immediately. The reply came fragmented, clipped, and useless. Enough to confirm presence, not enough to reduce uncertainty. Then came the order no sailor ever mistakes: general quarters. Across the strike group, watertight doors sealed. Damage control teams moved to stations. Missile cells sat armed under armored hatches. Gunners tracked surface contacts through electro-optical sights, while the carrier's captain had to think not just about the incoming boats, but about what an overreaction might trigger on shore. One burst of defensive fire, if captured on Iranian cameras or framed the right way in the wrong capital, could ignite a regional crisis before sunrise. This was no longer a tactical event. It was a geopolitical knife edge. Somewhere on the Iranian coast, anti-ship missile crews could already be watching. Systems capable of sea-skimming flight, batteries hidden in coastal terrain, mobile launchers that could fire and move before counterstrikes arrived. The U.S. fleet had layers of defense against them: airborne warning, electronic attack, standard missiles, rolling airframe missiles, close-in guns. But those layers work best with time, distance, and clean detection. The Strait gives you none of those things for free, and then, for the first time that night, the Americans saw the real pattern. The fast boat in front was not the attack. It was the clock. Its job was to force the fleet into a readiness posture, compress timelines, and pull attention toward the surface. Meanwhile, higher above the waterline, a small radar return appeared where there should have been none. Too slow for a missile, too deliberate for clutter. A drone, then another. Not armed, perhaps, or perhaps spotting, feeding locations, measuring reactions, mapping emissions. In a modern naval confrontation, the first weapon is often information. Within seconds, electronic warfare systems reached out like invisible hands. Signals were jammed, links were disrupted. One drone wobbled and vanished from the tactical display, but another remained. And with it came the unbearable question: who else was watching and what had already been transmitted? The MH-60R crew reported another suspicious sonar contact. Still inconclusive. Still enough to force choices. Decoys were prepared. Evasive routing options were calculated. The carrier subtly adjusted speed. One escort shifted position to shield. Another angled outward, presenting itself as the sharper edge of the formation. It was textbook naval strategy under pressure. Layer defenses, deny angles, control the tempo, reveal nothing. Then the turning point came from a place nobody on the surface could see. Farther out in deeper water, an American attack submarine, which had been trailing the transit from a classified distance, transmitted a coded burst. It had detected elevated activity closer to the Iranian coastline. Not a submerged attack platform closing in, as feared, but rapid movement among coastal units and patrol assets. That changed everything. The warning shot had not been the beginning of a strike. It had been a synchronized demonstration aggressive enough to provoke, short of the threshold that would justify overwhelming American fire. A test. A pressure probe against one of the most heavily armed naval formations on the planet. And yet, that did not make the moment any safer. In some ways, it made it more dangerous. Because when both sides are flexing, measuring, and daring the other to blink, accidents become strategy's most loyal accomplice. The Iranian boats kept closing. Not all the way, just enough. Close enough for the Americans to see the men on deck. Close enough for nervous fingers to matter. Close enough that every camera in the region, military and civilian, would later try to reconstruct exactly who did what first. The destroyer's commanding officer requested permission for graduated defensive action, flares, long-range acoustic hailing, warning fire if needed. The answer came back with the kind of caution born from experience in a region where a few seconds of noise can lead to months of funerals. Hold. Signal again. Maintain lock. Do not fire unless hostile intent becomes unmistakable. So they held. It is easy afterward to imagine war as a chain of explosions. In reality, war often begins as restraint under unbearable pressure. Sailors staring through sights, pilots waiting for launch, sonar operators listening to the ocean breathe, commanders betting that the other side wants a headline, not a battle. Then something else happened. The lead Iranian boat suddenly cut speed. No dramatic turn, no final rush. Just a sharp reduction, then a slow arc away from the strike group's path. The others mirrored it one by one, peeling off into the darkness like wolves deciding not to test the fire. The drone contact disappeared. Coastal emissions faded. The sonar anomaly was never reacquired with certainty. For a long moment, nobody aboard the U.S. fleet moved as if it were over, because everyone knew that in these waters, the difference between retreat and repositioning can be measured in minutes. But this time, the escalation stopped there. The carrier strike group continued its transit, not faster, not slower, as if refusing to grant the incident any outward victory. The fighters still launched at dawn, streaking over the Gulf to remind anyone watching that the fleet remained fully capable, fully armed, and fully present. Behind the scenes, intelligence officers would spend days dissecting every radar track, radio call, sonar ping, and infrared frame. Every second of the encounter would be reviewed in slow motion. The warning shot, the boat movements, the drone pattern, the coastal signals. Not because shots had landed, but because the night had exposed something far more important: how close everyone had come. Because that was the truth buried beneath the theater. One warning shot from a small patrol craft had forced an American carrier strike group into a combat posture. It had pulled fighter jets toward launch, awakened missile systems, activated anti-submarine helicopters, and pushed officers at sea and onshore into the same old question that haunts every armed standoff. Was this a signal or the beginning of war? No one fired the second shot that night. No missiles streaked over the Gulf. No torpedoes cut white scars through the water. No burning hulls sank into black waves. But the absence of catastrophe did not mean nothing happened. In fact, it meant everything happened except the final, irreversible thing: a rehearsal of disaster, a reminder that modern conflict does not always announce itself with invasion speeches and rolling armor. Sometimes it begins with a flash on dark water and a decision made in less than 10 seconds. And that is what makes places like the Strait of Hormuz so dangerous. Not just the weapons packed into its narrow edges, but the psychology, the need to project strength, the fear of appearing weak, the temptation to push right up to the red line, trusting professionalism, caution, and luck to keep catastrophe from crossing it. Aircraft carriers, submarines, missile batteries, drones, destroyers, fast boats, torpedoes, radar, jamming, fighter jets, all of it compressed into a corridor where history can turn on a misunderstanding. By sunrise, the sea looked calm again. Merchant ships continued moving through the channel. Oil kept flowing. Official statements, when they came, would be measured, legalistic, almost sterile. Harassment, unsafe maneuvering, professional response, routine transit. But none of those phrases could capture what it felt like at 2:43 a.m., when one flash on the horizon forced hundreds of men to prepare for the possibility that the next minute might be their last. And perhaps that is the most unsettling part of all. The world often imagines war as a deliberate choice, something declared by presidents, approved by parliaments, and explained in headlines. But out at sea, in the darkness between rival fleets, war can arrive as something smaller, faster, and far more human. A misread maneuver, a nervous hand, a warning shot meant for the water, a radar contact interpreted one way instead of another. That night, everyone stepped back. Seconds later, the Gulf did not explode. But the men who were there understood something the rest of the world rarely sees. The distance between deterrence and disaster is not measured in miles. It is measured in seconds.